Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gunawan, or you can call me Gunte for short. I'm a lecturer at Petra Christian University, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies and moderator for this event. On behalf of Petra Christian University, I would like to extend very warm welcome to all of you to the first international guest lecture series of PCU Architecture Department. Today is inviting Professor Emeritus Henry Sanoff. Before we start the guest lecture, let me lead you in prayer, and you can pray according to your belief. Let me pray in Christian faith. Dear God, thank you for your goodness and your blessing over us, and you have made this international guest lecture happen. Please bless and make us safe during this talk, and bless Prof. Sanoff and all attendants, and that this activity will be a blessing for all of us. Thank you. Amen. I would like to invite our Dean of Faculty, Civil Engineering and Planning, Petra Christian University, Ms. Ruli Damayanti, PhD, but because she's not present, she will be represented by Dr. Agus Dwi Haryanto. The time yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Gunte. Good evening or good morning for Prof. Sanoff to each one of you present today. It is a moment of pleasure to welcome all participants who are present here online to attend this lecture. On behalf of the Department of Architecture, Faculty of Civil Engineering and Planning, Petra Christian University, I offer my regards to all participants joining us. I convey my regards to our professor today, Professor Henry Sanoff. Thank you so much for accepting our invitations. The topic of the lecture today will focus on participatory action research in architecture. I wish this lecture enlightens us all with the approaches to deal with the problems in our research or designs of tomorrow. Thank you so much, Pak Gunte.
Okay, we'll continue. Thank you, Dr. Dwi. Here's what to expect from tonight's guest lecture, which is the wonderful knowledge of participatory action research in architecture. From Sanoff's article written in 2006, participatory action research is defined as a research by people. So research is not only knowledge creation, but is also education for real action. Therefore, I'm introducing Professor Emeritus Henry Sanoff. Prof. Henry Sanoff is teaching in Architecture Department, North Carolina State University. He has 4 decades of research and professional practice experience, mainly concentrated in programming, planning, and designing school facilities. He also has been visiting, he's been a visiting lecturer for more than in 85 institutions such as University of London, University of Sydney, Melbourne, and etc. He was the USA editor of Journal of Design Studies and founder of Environmental Design Research Association, or IDRA. And his latest publication is Participatory Design, A Historical Perspective, 2021, and so many more books. And maybe I just add one more thing. He has received many awards, NCSU Holiday Medal of Excellence, Phi Kappa, Phi Faculty Achievement, and so on. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest lecturer, Prof. Sanoff. The time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have a screen. Oh, okay.
Yes, I think it's working. Yeah. Okay.
How do I get rid of the bar across the top?
I think it's not visible from here. I think it should be fine. I think it's just operation only. It should be fine. Yeah, you can go up and down. No worries. Okay. Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah.
The whole concept of participatory action research is really changing the nature of professional practice. Now, action research was coined by a psychologist named Kurt Lewin, and he was really talking to other psychologists and indicating that psychologists need to act on a system to change it. Now, typically, psychologists deal with one aspect of a problem, but he's arguing that that's insufficient. But the idea of action research has become popular in many, many different fields, from criminology, public health. There's an encyclopedia of action research, and it has maybe 1,000 people from around the world that have entries in this encyclopedia. Actually, I'm the only architect. Now, so participatory action research is based on the belief that people who use the environment, who are the traditional subjects of research, become active participants in the research and in changing the environment. Another way of saying it is community participation. I think as professionals, it's important that we use a language to communicate to people who are not design professionals, which is different than the language that we use to communicate with design and planning professionals. So I tend not to use words like research, action research, sometimes community participation, but mostly the concept of design games. Now, you've all played games, chess, checkers, Monopoly, and one of the interesting features of games is that they're engaging. Typically, it's small groups playing together. But one of the problems with games is that there are winners and losers. Now, in the design and planning world, we can't have losers. Everybody has to be a winner. And so the concept of design games is quite different. It's really based on small group interaction where there are rules. Games must have rules, where people kind of make individual decisions and then collective decisions by consensus and not voting. Now, I originally wrote design games in 1975. It was translated into Japanese, and in Japan, they talk about this as the design games approach to design and planning. Korean, and just recently in Spanish. So this is what a typical game would look like. Small groups of people working together. And what's important about this, many people have something to contribute to any discussion, but not everybody feels comfortable in speaking in large groups. Large groups have a problem of people dominating the group. Sometimes a political figure, a religious figure can dominate a large group. All of the projects that I'll talk to you about are basically small groups working together. People learn from each other. People have different kind of values, and in a small group, people have a better tendency to listen to each other. The sociological concept is called values clarification. People learn and talk to each other. Nobody can, if there's an aggressive person, that person can only dominate a few others in a small group. So I'm going to start with the town of Bangalore in Australia. This is the northern tip of Australia. Some years ago, there was a plan, and this was the stopover point for people who are driving from Sydney all the way up to the north coast. People would stop for a few days or a day. So it's a tourist attraction. And there was a concern that the government was going to plan a highway to bypass the town of Bangalore. This was maybe 25, 30 years ago, but a very scruffy looking town, one historic building. Now, I was going to be teaching at Sydney, so they asked if I could come a few days earlier to talk to the people in Bangalore, because they were concerned that if the highway is built, something could drastically happen in the town. They suggested they could put together a team. There was a local historian, architect, and I argued, no, I'll have my own team. And I asked the head of architecture from the University of Sydney to send 4 students, 4 architecture students, not knowing what they would do, who I was. They were second-year students, third-year student, 4 students. One was a fifth-year student. The train ride was 6 or 7 hours from Sydney, and 4 students arrived not knowing what was going to happen, other than they would have a place to sleep and food to eat. So the first step was really a walking tour around the town. Now, perhaps the most important thing, the newspaper is very powerful in many towns. Bangalore is wonderful, says visiting expert. Now, this is really important because in the design and planning world, we tend to take a negative look at issues, solve the problem. Well, if you talk about problem at the beginning of a project, it casts a negative impression. If you talk about something positive, people feel good about the town to start with, and then they can talk about the kinds of things that are making changes. The concept is like ABCD, asset-based community development. Always look at the positive features, whether it's a small town or a building. The other thing that's really crucial is that when we talk about community, we're talking about everybody, not only adults, but children as well, because they have a stake in what's happening. And of course, in small towns all over the world, there's really nothing to do when children become students and look for work, so they go to large cities. So it's important to find the kinds of activities that could occur in the town to keep young people in the town. So this is an elementary school. The older students will make models of what the town could be like. The younger students will do drawings. Now this is also important because the young people will feel they're a part of the town. They'll talk to their parents about what's happening. So they're a conduit. They're providing information to their parents about what's going to be happening. The first stage of the process is interviewing people. So we spent about 30, 40 minutes the entire day with 3 student groups, interviewing people about the positive features of the town and what they would like to see happen. So this, based on the information that we got, we identified key features of the town that needed to be improved. And so we established a workshop, community workshops, first one the town ever had. And it's called Pride in Place. Again, we have to start with a kind of positive outlook for the town. About 80 people came, and this is a small town, 10,000 or more, but the county is quite large. So in most of the workshops, it's interesting because male and female people participate. And in some countries, women really don't have an opportunity to have a voice. So the purpose of the workshop is really to talk about what's important? What goals are important for the development of the town? Something for young people, looking at the town's historical character. Now, goals in and of itself is okay, but you need to identify the strategies for how to accomplish those goals. So there has to be some kind of plan. And once the strategies are identified, then we talk about an action plan. What are the specific actions? Who's responsible to do that? And how much is it going to cost? Now, one thing that's very unique about workshops in Australia, there's a pitcher of beer at every table. Now, you can't do this in the United States, especially in some of the more religious areas. But in places like Japan and Australia, beer is very popular. And, you know, sometimes beer helps to stimulate the kind of conversation or discussion. But the people themselves request the beer. This is not something that I provide. Now, so the strategy was based on interviews, key features were identified. And so the town, entrance to the town, and then a sketch of what it could look like. Now, there were second-year students, third-year students, some were able to do good drawings, but the point was to at least have people talk about what they like or dislike about the existing scene, and then what they like or dislike about the design idea. This is what the entrance to the town looks like today. At the workshop, when there was a discussion about the town entrance, one of the women said she was going to donate 50 palm trees to the town. And so in a day, the entire entrance to the town dramatically changed. There was a vacant old theater building. And the idea again was to have people look at this, because if we didn't bring it to their attention, it probably could have been ignored. That's what it looks like today. The existing town at one point had verandas. Verandas are like terraces, similar to the drawing below. Now, years ago, those verandas were torn down, and a lot of people in the town wanted to bring them back, to bring back the historic character of the town. So this is what the town looked like when we started. This is what it looks like today. Now, one thing about planning, the process takes several years. So what's essential is really organizing the community to be able to continue the project themselves. And that's what the concept of action planning is. Identify what actions are important, who's going to do it. In any kind of planning situation, there always is a public and private partnership. The public has sometimes federal support, government support. Private, people have to invest. Now, in Japan, I probably have been in more cities in Japan than most Japanese people. And I've done a number of projects. I'm showing you one, which is a town of Nano, which is the northern part of Japan. Now, Japan, has a lot of people, but not very much land. And in this town, the local government was proposing a recreation area by filling in part of the river. And the town planners and architects spent 2 years generating proposals which were rejected by the community continuously. So a group of people, some from government, some from private sector, contacted me and asked if I would come to help. Now, I think I mentioned earlier, I have an arrangement with my wife that I won't spend more than 5 days away from home, which is 2 days travel and 3 days to do the project, no matter what the project is. And so before I even arrived, I wrote and suggested that we arrange a boat ride for students, parents, and teachers around what might be the perimeter of the area of the river that would be filled in for recreation. So there were 60 students and teachers. And the idea was to first to make sure that the young people are involved, because recreation is not only for older people, it's for young people as well. And we wanted them to be part of the whole process. Now, often when I do projects in Japan, there are a lot of people that come from different parts of the country to observe what's happening. There's a whole movement that has been in the last 10 years in Japan where people describe themselves as community designers. They're not professional designers, they're not professional planners, but they're interested in the whole idea of bringing the community together to make changes. So about 30 people came, but I really don't accept observers, so I had to put everybody to work. So the workshop that we were planning was not unlike the one in Bangalore, but the idea was to identify the whole range of possible objectives for a recreation area. So here there's a team brainstorming possible objectives. Then they would interpret it for me. Then the next step is to identify all the activities that could occur in a recreation area, and then create graphic symbols that correspond to each recreation activity. And the symbols had to be done in scale. So for example, there could be a playground. So there are 8 symbols, and the symbol corresponds to the magnitude of the area based on the size of the population. So a forest area might be twice as large as a playground. So it was important to think about a relative scale for all of these activities that would be located in the area that was filled. We established a base plan by outlining the perimeter of the filled area. I met with a number of students to talk to them about the entire process that they'd be going through in the workshop. The workshop was held on a Sunday morning. About 80 people attended, small groups. And basically, they were involved with establishing what they thought were the most important objectives for a recreation area, what kinds of activities would occur, and then to locate those activities on the base plan, base map. Now this was important because as designers, there's a concept called trade-offs. You can't always have everything. So you have to make decisions about what's important. Now, typically, I don't use the language of trade-off, because if you have to define what it is, it's a mistake. But in the process of actually locating the activities they selected, they realize that they all cannot fit in the base map. So they have to make trade-offs. They have to decide which is the most important. So here there are men and women working together, students working together. There's a women's group, cutting and pasting and doing a site plan for the recreation area. Young female students also built a 3-dimensional model. Then everybody presented. There's a 2-hour process. Everybody presented their ideas. And this is all done in scale. We broke for lunch, and then the next step was to present for each of the teams to present their work to the entire community. About 350, 400 people came. It was an auditorium in the museum. These were all local people presenting their ideas. And this was very important. It wasn't I just outlined the process, but local people. Now, perhaps one of the interesting things, there was a team of young boys, about 11 years old, and as they were presenting their work, they would say, well, here's a special area in this park where our fathers could sit and drink beer. Well, the whole audience exploded because none of the parents would ever say, we need a place where we can drink beer. But young people are totally uninhibited, and it became very clear how important it is to have young people involved in any process. So we kind of assembled all of the ideas that were generated, came up with a base plan, and the mayor was there, and the mayor said, well, you know, this is what our government architects and planners have been presenting for the past 2 years. But the difference was this idea came from the community. And the whole concept of a sense of ownership then becomes really important. Now, I have an arrangement with a lot of projects that I do in Japan that if I do a workshop, I expect to see results in 1 year. In 1 year, it was built. And then it was expanded for a picnic area. So this is basically a 3-day project, and then local people, local architects and planners did the work, where in 3 days we were able to accomplish what local government couldn't do in 2 years. Now, I also do schools, other community arts centers, and a wide range of different kinds of projects, but I'm going to show you schools because schools are important because typically what we know about in education doesn't translate into school buildings. I've always argued that, you know, each child has 3 teachers: a parents, a teacher, and a school building. School building sends out messages to children, and architects typically don't think about young people or teachers when they're designing schools. In some countries, standard plans are used for building schools, no matter what the climate, no matter what the site looks like. Now, in this is a small town where the existing school was impossible to maintain. It was deteriorated. And the idea was to build a new school close to where the existing school was. So the first step is always involve the children. All the children had to talk about. Now, this is what appeared in the newspaper. The Davidson School designed with kids in mind. Kids drawing was on the front page. Now this is really important because the press can be an enemy or it can be an ally. And quite often we see negative information coming out of the press, especially when it has to do with architecture and planning. But the process was with teachers and parents and children, we don't use the concept of goals because a lot of times you have to define what a goal means. But I use the concept of I call it a poem, a wish poem, where parents and teachers and children complete the phrase, I wish my school. All the teachers do this, all the children do this, and it's done by different grades, first grade, second grade, third grade, and the parents and the Parent Teachers Association do this. And so we have a lot of data, and what we do is, I call it content analysis, look at which of the concepts that keep reappearing most frequently. So I wish my school was warm, colorful, and friendly, small, intimate feeling, beautiful, unique, and interesting, lots of sunlight. I never heard teachers say we want an ugly school. So each group, teachers and parents wanted, I wish my school to be state and nationally recognized. Now, typically, it's usually architects who try to be the advocates for beautiful buildings. But here, the parents want a building that would be state and nationally recognized. So right to begin with, before any work is done, there's a support mechanism of the wish poem. And it's really a charge for the architect to do something nationally recognized. So we did a series of workshops with teachers, where the teachers, independent of what subject they taught, really were looking at educational objectives. How do students learn? What are the different methods? Going back to what they learned when they were studying to be a teacher, which they don't practice anymore. So one of the techniques is a deck of cards of pictures of places. Now, what we try to do is to sensitize teachers to the physical environment and how the physical environment can support specific teaching methods. So there are lots of pictures of different places where different form of learning could occur, not only in school buildings, but in the community as well. Now, these were created specifically that they won't match perfectly any teaching method. So the teachers have to look at these pictures and begin to, think about how it has to change to make it work for a particular learning method. Whoops, sorry. So this is really the first step in really sensitizing teachers to the physical environment and how it actually can be a third teacher. So they're always working together, small groups. They go through 2 or 3 different phases. Phase 1 is establishing important learning methods. They have to agree. Then they select the pictures to satisfy those learning methods. There are several other aspects of the workshop, but the most interesting is the site planning. In many countries, there are what you call educational specifications, or there's a laundry list of the number of rooms and the size of the building. And in this particular moment, there were 4 schools being built at the same time, same budget, different sites. This was the only school where we actually worked with the children, the parents, and teachers. But also, when we opened up the workshop to the community, there were local artists in the town. And the artists wanted to be able to display their work, painting and sculpture. And so they were part of the workshop as well. So the groups came together and started looking at ways in which they can satisfy the requirements. And one of the issues that came up regularly was sunlight, lots of sunlight, because their experience in the previous school was that the classrooms were along a corridor. It was called a double-loaded corridor, classrooms on both sides of the corridor, which meant that some classrooms face south, some classrooms face north. South has direct sun, north doesn't. So the teachers and the students were complaining that it's often very cold on one side and very warm on the other side. So one of the key ingredients was to have all the classrooms facing south. So they started working, and there was even a local architect involved. And then they presented their work, and they said, well, we can't solve the problem. You're the architect, you solve the problem. Now, this is really important because most people do not know what architects do. Some of you are students. Did you ever explain to your parents what you do? They may not understand unless they're also architects. Now, the thing that's important to remember forever is that as professionals, you will be in contact with people not unlike your parents. But the one thing that's different, your parents love you. So they all presented their work, and they all agreed they couldn't solve the problem. So this was our responsibility to solve the problem. So we took all their work, looked at it, and I came up with a sketch of 3 clusters of classrooms all facing south. Now, the other thing that was important was the idea of having a place for artists, painters, and sculptors to exhibit their work. So there were a series of towers which became exhibition areas. The plans were brought to the school. Teachers were making comments about things that needed to be changed. The final plan was developed. Now, one thing that was interesting about this, the teachers talked about having an outdoor classroom. Now, not all learning occurs indoors, but in many countries, governments don't allow more than one entrance to a classroom, which is typically along the corridor. Now, if you're going to have an outdoor classroom, it means you need another entrance. So here, for example, is one entrance to the classrooms from the corridor and another to the outdoor classroom. It's a very controversial issue with the state government, and the community was very strong. About 100 parents and teachers came together and said that this is the plan that we wanted, and so this is the way it was actually built. So these are the towers, the galleries for the artists, painters, and sculptors to display their work. Now, what was equally important, since the artists were part of the community and part of the school system, they worked with teachers in expanding this whole concept of ownership. Artists work with the children. This is, after about a year. Each leaf on the tree has a child's name in it. Now, this was about 25 years ago. The young people, some of them who are 10-year-olds now, are married and have children and bring their children to the school to show them their parents' name on the leaf. So the impact of this as a school that the community owns is tremendous. The students are doing drawings. There are names on each one of the houses. These are the houses in the community. So over the years, the walls are lined with murals done by students with architects. And so the quality of artwork is phenomenal. Headlines in the newspaper, kids get user-friendly school. This is what the school looked like when we just completed it. And this is what the school looks like today. Now, I haven't spoken about the concept of post-occupancy evaluation, which means that, when you design something, you're making assumptions, but then you have to validate those assumptions, so you have to go back. And so we have been going back every 5 or 6 years, and the quality of the environment has improved. There's a strong sense of ownership, and ownership is really one of the key issues in successful buildings, any kind of buildings. In Minnesota is a state in the northern part of the United States, which is very cold and very snowy. And we live in the southern part of the United States where the sun shines all the time. So in the United States, architects are selected to submit proposals. And we were invited to submit a proposal for a master plan for this site, which was a school of Minnesota Center for Arts Education. This building that exists was originally a Bible college, which went bankrupt, and it was bought by the state, and the interior was converted to arts activities, dance, music, theater. And we started with, there's a two-stage process. First stage, you need to submit a master plan to the state government before you're allowed to propose any kind of physical changes. So in order to do that, we interviewed students. We established basically a program called the Spatial Data Inventory. We identified every classroom in the entire buildings, the amount of space that was available, and what was needed. And this was done with discussions of each of the students and teachers in each one of the activity areas, whether it's dance, whether it was theater, whether it was media arts, music. Here I'm meeting with library people. Again, we use the symbols. The symbols correspond to every single activity that could occur in this complex. And again, it was also done in scale. So for example, the student services is quite small, theater is quite big, always in scale. Now in this school, arts education, none of the students knew anything about design. There was no design at all. It was purely arts. Now, one of the problems, first thing is that the way the campus was laid out, the buildings were not connected. And this was like the old Bible college. And when the students would go from one building to the other, it was so cold that their fingers would freeze. And if you're playing a guitar or picking up a paintbrush, that can be really disastrous. So the plan was to have a workshop with all of the students, because they were the experts. Whether it was dance, whether it was music, theater, they were the experts. They knew more about it because they experienced it. And so all of the students were involved, all of the teachers were involved. It was maybe a 2.5 or 3 hour workshop, which included lunch. Some of the teachers couldn't sit on the floor to work, so they had a little table. And so working on the floor, basically what they were doing is taking the activities and locating them on the campus plan. Where should they occur? And then they presented their work. And this was really, a wonderful experience for them because, first of all, they were treated as experienced dancers, visual artists, musicians, presenting their ideas. So the presentations were really quite fabulous. Then we hung up about maybe 35 or 40 different site plans. Now, what you see, the yellow, that's all new construction, basically covering that existing building, which everybody thought was very ugly. So yeah, the yellow was all new construction, and the idea was to connect all the pieces. So the master plan was really essential in order to get approval to continue. Now, we learned as we were doing this that state government only allows about $6 or $7 million for any individual project at a time. So it's necessary to establish priorities of which were the important activities. And it turned out that the music building was the highest priority. The teachers and administrators looked at the site plan and all agreed that that's exactly what they were talking about. This is the color-coded master plan, and the blue represented first priority. So when this was done, it was presented, and then we were allowed to continue by a presentation for the design of the music school. So we went back to Minnesota, met with all the students and all the teachers, and a lot of government officials came because they couldn't believe that we were able to bring so many people together in a very short period of time and reach agreement. So the press was here, everybody was watching it. And we had several alternatives for the music school. Each group presented their ideas. Oops. This is the music school. This is that ugly building that you saw earlier. There's a parent-teachers group, and all the results were presented to them. And whoops, the model was built. I have a very lively mouse. A model was built, and then the building was built, completed, and we won an award. But the United States, things happen very quickly. So the governor, who was supportive of the whole process, even though we were from another state, was not reelected. So there was never a continuation of the development of the master plan. But this first project was built and was quite successful. So it doesn't make any difference if it's a new building or remodeling or an addition. This is an old building from the 1970s. This was typical of what schools looked like at the time. And here I teamed up with a former student of mine who has an office. We've been working together for about 20 years. Plus, I started a PhD program. The PhD was community and environmental design. Now, in PhD, you don't have design studios, but when you're talking about community, it was necessary to have the community experience. So I teamed up with several of my PhD students and two architects from the firm of the Adams Group. Now, this is a small project, 6 classroom edition. But one of the issues that we were trying to address is a criticism that if you involve people in the process, you're only going to achieve what they've already experienced. So this innovation is not possible. So the purpose of showing you this is to show you that that's absolutely wrong, because people can accept ideas that they've never seen before. So this is a 6 classroom extension to an existing school building. So the first step was a kind of rediscovery. The teachers had to walk through the classrooms, and we developed a rating scale where they had to rate not only their own classroom, but all the classrooms. The rating scale had to do with spatial qualities, physical attributes, furniture, and teachers, many people, tend to adjust very quickly to unsatisfactory conditions. And so we wanted to change that whole process. And so we developed a workshop. All the teachers participated. We were actually working on 2 schools on this campus, classroom extensions. Now, the idea was to look at the classroom. So we reviewed about 200 schools around the world to look at different classroom arrangements. And each one of these arrangements is for 50 students. They're conventional classrooms plus various shapes. And we also developed criteria based on the educational literature. What was important for learning? Teachers working in small groups and working together, always working in groups, making individual decisions, then agreeing. Now this is important too, because typically people who are not designers cannot read plans. Now here, by actually showing these kind of perspective drawings, people were walking through, and if one person didn't understand, they would explain it to somebody else, so that everybody had a very clear grasp of what the scheme was like. So all the teachers agreed this is an L-shaped class, 2 L-shaped classrooms. And the criteria was students could turn learning activities, variety of teaching methods, team teaching, student sense of privacy. This was really important because none of the teachers had ever experienced an L-shaped classroom. And they all agreed this was what they wanted. This is the old MAC, and these are some of the PhD students actually working on the community project. The design workshop, there was agreement in the last workshop that the L-shaped classroom was appropriate. So the next step was to come up with design alternatives. 2 alternatives were developed. The gray is the existing building, and the 6 classroom addition is in the brown. So they had to select which scheme in terms of safety, visual appearance, relationship of classroom to the existing building, teacher-friendly classroom addition, and they all selected this. So we did it. That was a classroom addition. And that's what it looks like. Now, this was interesting because one of the issues with L-shaped classrooms is that you don't have the traditional linear corridor. There are breakout spaces so that the students can spill out into the hallway, into those breakout spaces. So you don't have the image of traditional corridors. Now, when the building was completed, all the teachers in the school wanted to go into these classrooms. But the principal couldn't do that, so they had kindergarten and first grade go into the classrooms. One of the issues that's become very popular in the last 10, 15 years around the world is riverfront development, mostly in terms of tourist activities. Now, this was another project where PhD students were involved, working with me to have that kind of community experience. This is a small town in the middle of the United States, Owensboro, Kentucky. Small town where most of the people that live there were born there. So this is what the riverfront looked like. Now, in different cities in the state, the government provided funds for riverfront development. So the mayor of the city said, well, we should try that also because this is a very desolate riverfront. But his concept of getting people involved was to hire a landscape architect to propose a plan and then invite the community to react to it. Now there's an NGO, private foundation, that's been doing a lot of work in healthcare with the community. And they were very powerful people. And they argued that that's really not what it's all about. So they did a net search. And they saw a number of planning and landscape firms that had specific proposals for riverfront development, which they didn't like. And they found a book that I wrote, Community Participation Methods in Design and Planning. So they called and asked me if I would come and talk to them about the town. This is a street adjacent to the riverfront, which is interesting because while most cities have changed the character, this has the same 100-year-old character. So before I came, I said I'd like to organize a meeting specifically with the principals of the schools. There's a technical school, high school, middle school, because I wanted to meet with them because in a project of this scope for this small town, public-private partnerships were essential. So even if they were able to get money from the government, that wasn't sufficient. There had to be a lot of private investment. And so I met with the school principals, and the idea was to involve the students in the development of the riverfront. And the teachers had to figure out what would be the best way they could do it that would fit into their kind of educational process. Of course, the press is always involved. So what was happening was absolutely unbelievable, because the high school teachers were meeting with the kindergarten teachers, and they had teams of a high school student, 16-year-old, and a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, working together on projects. And this was happening throughout the town. Now, this was a lot of fun for the students also, not only for the young ones, but for the older ones as well. They were building models, doing drawings, telling their parents what was going on. It has the contagion effect. I built a model of the entire riverfront. There was a workshop. The workshop had 125 people in a small town, which is really remarkable. Now, the workshop included key legislators from the state, mayor, ex-mayor, a wide range of different people. Now, over the course of the project, there were a number of focus groups where teams would go to churches, community centers, elderly housing, to get people's ideas of what kinds of activities could occur on the riverfront. I explained the process that we were going through. The state legislators, I mean, men, women, young people, older people. Whoops. So the riverfront was developed in 3 different areas. These are a whole series of objectives that came out of our discussions. And each group had to identify the 3 most important objectives and which activities would support those objectives. Senior citizens, elderly people, and then the students would present their ideas. And the presentation was very important. All the groups presented their ideas. So for example, objectives for this segment of the riverfront: attract people and investment to the riverfront, create a visually pleasing order to the riverfront, develop an arts entertainment district. And the activities were arts and crafts, retail shop, restaurant, park, riverfront. This was a typical plan. So not only were they identifying, locating the symbols, but they were also making notes of what they thought were important. And so this was a summary of all the activities that should occur in different parts of the riverfront. So this building was the building where the workshop was held. Once we completed the project, some people emerged. And today, this is what it looks like. It's absolutely phenomenal. This is a small town, less than 100,000 people. And it's attracting tourists, but most importantly, it's for the people who live there. So that workshop that just took, workshop was just one day, a couple of days, helped to generate an idea where there was a strong sense of ownership, that people own this area. The most recent book that describes a lot of the case studies is called Participatory Environmental Design. But the classic book, which has been used for about 20 years, is called Community Participation Methods in Design and Planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Henry Sanoff, for the wonderful talk. Yeah, I might just summarize a little bit. So the key points from your talk, we understand that we need to involve the local residents and utilize models, maps, or symbols that are understood by the local residents to create the workshops, right? So I just want to highlight that there are 106 external participants from outside of Petra Christian University registering to come to the talk, but unfortunately, maybe not all coming. It's only 61 at the moment, 61 people at the moment, and I just read some of the university that have come: University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China; CUNY Graduate Center, New York; University of Sao Paulo, Brazil; some universities from Java and Celebes, and in Indonesia locally, UN Habitat, Garamin, one of the advocacy movement of disability people in NTT in Nusa Tenggara, in eastern part of Indonesia, and Sika, the producer of building material. Okay, there are several questions, interesting questions that are already asked by the for the participants that need to ask the questions. Please chat first in the chatting box, because I need to rearrange the similar questions. Okay, for the first question, it's actually from Mr. Daniel, our student. Sorry, Prof. Sanoff, can you see the chat box, or do you want me to read it for you? You cannot see that? Okay, maybe I just read it for you. Can you share? It's okay. Can you share your experience in participatory action research in developing countries, or in area that are less wealthy? Yeah, maybe because I saw your maybe Mr. Daniel mentioned he means that your sample is more in Japan or America or Australia that are quite wealthy in economy. Do you have any sample or any approach for developing countries like Indonesia that we have so much limitation? Sorry.
Of course. I can't show you everything that I've done because it's been 40 years worth of projects. But
Yeah.
yes, I do a lot of work in Mexico,
Okay.
in very small rural villages. Mexico has been probably where I've done most of the work because it's very close to the United States. And a
Okay.
lot of my work has been translated into Spanish.
Okay.
So yes, the techniques don't change. They're the same.
Okay.
Because there's local people that need to do it themselves.
Mm. So is it the same methods that you apply so far
Yes,
in
yes,
Mexico?
yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
So it's
When I first started doing this, there was an article in a Swiss architectural magazine that talks about how I've developed techniques for illiterate people. Now, not necessarily illiterate people, but we've worked with people who cannot read and write, but the symbols work with anybody.
okay. Thank you so much for the questions. Maybe I will move to Miss Berti from Garamin. Prof. Henry, it is interesting to see how community or students can participate on research. However, may I ask something? Do you see the changes how people with disability or other vulnerable people being involved as researchers, or maybe as designers? And sorry, do you have any
Sure. When we started in North Carolina in the 80s, the disability movement, and for the whole United States.
okay.
And now the strategy, one of the strategies was how do you get, especially in universities, how do you get university administrators to provide support for those people with different disabilities to negotiate the environment. And so the first step was to create a role-playing game where in North Carolina, there are 16 campuses that are part of the system. We invited the key person from every campus who was in charge of finance to come to our city. Had 16 people, had 16 students. The key administrators were assuming the role of some form of disability, blind, in a wheelchair, with crutches. And they were assigned to go to 2 or 3 different locations on the campus. Now, there was always a student with them so they wouldn't hurt themselves. Now, the student teams, the students then assumed the role of the university administrators. And as the university administrators moved around with a crutch or a wheelchair, they came back exhausted, angry at how difficult it was to move through the campus. And all of a sudden, money began to appear to make physical changes. Elevators were put in to buildings that had more than 1 story. Sidewalks were changed. A whole range of different things occurred. And one of my PhD students in Turkey has done something similar, and the campus was changed dramatically. So actually, the role-playing game is very powerful, because when people experience the situation of what it's like to be in a wheelchair, what it's like to be blind, what it's like to have crutches, and not only that, but we began to realize in the United States that at some point, almost everybody is temporarily disabled. Pregnant women, athletes, continuously breaking arms, breaking legs. So it's really not for this kind of narrow population. It's really for everybody. So yes, there's no, it's a common issue throughout.
Okay, maybe I will try to ask or to invite Miss Bertie. She's actually my colleague from North. Can you respond to Prof. Henry Sanoff? Because it's quite interesting. You have done several participatory action research yourself, right? Can you share a little bit on your case in Kupang in NTT?
Yeah, thank you, Pak Gunawan. Thank you, Prof. Henry, for your thought. And I'm really interested because we are doing like a research in a village called Wailomin. And it is, we want to show to the local people that people with disability have the right to access for the public building at their village offices. And we came in the village. One of my friends with disability, she did a great work, like being make a friend with the villagers, and then try to have like some key person and involve a man with disability and some women with disability. So we have, like we say that women with disability and pregnancy as well. So they have multiple disability on that village. And then we saw that when they want to like having later, or they want to have like service from the village officer, it's hard for them because we love stairs so much in our place, like churches and so many public buildings. We have so many stairs, and it is hard for people with physical disability to go there. And one day we want to like make the ramp enter, but we don't know the measure because we have the local resources like the carpenter and then people who can help us, but I don't know how to measure it. So I learned universal design, but I'm not an architect. but we try
cool.
our best. So we invite one of my friends to study, she is an architect, and then she teach the local village, local people in the village, and then we did it. But we involved one friend. She is a researcher, so she also can try to use her wheelchair to do it. But yeah, it is important that we
Yes.
can use the local material, not like in a Western country. They have
Okay.
like good material, but we try our best. And participatory action research, it's so perfect that we use it
Okay.
in the community. Thank you, Pak Gunawan.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Miss Bertie. Yeah. Maybe that's a good example also that we in Indonesia try to use the participatory action research, Prof. Sanoff. Do you have any comment on that? Small research utilizing the real people with disability. Is it better, or is it, or maybe just, is it similar like your practice in US?
Well, we've been doing this for more than 30 years. So changes don't occur overnight.
Okay.
It takes a long time, and it takes a lot of persuasion. And it's not only in rural areas for poor people, but in cities.
Yes.
The problem is, even something like changing the sidewalks so that a wheelchair can go from the sidewalk to the street. That becomes controversial because people who are blind don't like that, because they use the edge of the curb to guide them where the end of the street is. So not only is it difficult to make the changes, but there are different populations that have different requirements. So it
Yes.
becomes even more complicated, yes.
Okay. So more people with disability or other vulnerable people involved, it should be better, right? Okay, we have another question from Miss Luciana Cristanto. She's actually our lecturer. How many people usually you can involve? How many people can you invite in the one project? So the project can be effective, and also in 3 days you said you need only 3 days to do the
International projects, yes. It doesn't make any difference. The numbers, 100, 200, it doesn't make any difference. You just need a large enough
okay.
space so that people can work in small groups.
Oh, so you can make it groups from 100, right? So
Sure.
you make every 5 people a group or something like that. Do you mean?
That's right.
Okay.
Always. Never work with the entire group. It's always got to be small groups. So it doesn't make any difference how many people. It's just a question of whether you have enough space available for all those people.
Okay. Okay. There is a question from Mr. Bagas, also from PCU students. Maybe I have another question from, sorry, I just summarize first. I think it's different. Maybe I will read Mr. Bagas. Do you have any experience in Asian culture that have different political condition, like in US or Australia, people have freedom of speech, but in Asian countries, sometimes we have less freedom in speech, or militaristic regime or something. Do you have experience in Asian countries with difficult political situation?
The only Asian countries that I worked in extensively is Korea and Japan.
Oh, okay.
But now there's another kind of problem. It's a cultural problem in Asian countries, irrespective of the political situation. Because typically, age is very important in Asian countries.
Mm.
So when we put a group of people together, if they're, and it doesn't make any difference, people can come from government, can be farmers. Typical situation is if there's an older person at the table, no matter what the rank of the other people are, they refuse to say anything because
Okay.
age is respected. So the whole concept of
Okay.
design games has had a
Mm.
big impact in Korea and Japan
Mm.
because people are reluctant to begin with, but after a while, men and women are communicating, old people and young people are communicating. So it's had a real major cultural impact.
Yes.
Now, I haven't worked in, well, I guess there are examples in the United States of very conservative communities. You might call them racist communities.
Mm.
And the only projects I accept in some of these communities where they're black and white people is if both groups are available and eligible to participate. If they're
Mm.
not, I won't accept the project. So, I mean, I do have kind of basic requirements of the kinds of projects that I accept. There has to be an openness to participation. There
Okay.
has to be an openness to all people to be involved.
Okay. So openness is the key words like for successful PAR. Okay. There is another question from Yoranga, Mr. Yoranga from ITB. He says, thank you for your presentation. Based on your experience in several workshops, how do you engage the community in the first place so they can become, or they can trust you and to join the workshop enthusiastically? Yeah. Because
Well,
sometimes they only have several days, right? So it's really hard to.
well, first of all, I
Mm.
have to be invited into the community.
Mm.
That's critical. If I'm not invited, I can't do anything. It's impossible.
Okay.
So that's the key point. So typically, it will be local people, sometimes government, sometimes local people organize, know about my work, and will invite me. Not knowing how I'm going to work, but knowing that there's going to be some kind of community involvement. So it's difficult to go into some place. It's difficult, for example, for the government to go into a community and try these projects, try this process, if the community is not already open and willing to accept it. There's always, in many places around the world, people are suspect of government intervention. Even, United States, Japan, and people
Mm.
don't participate if it's government sponsored, because typically government doesn't listen. And that happens in the United States all the time.
Mm.
So it really depends on being invited, because they expect there's going to be some kind of community activity.
Okay, one more. Actually, maybe I misread the last question from Mr. Yoranga. How about the boredness? Sometimes people don't feel excited. How do you change the situation to become interesting? Sorry,
Well,
there
if
are two questions.
if people come to the workshop, they're not going to be bored. It's not going to happen because they're working
Okay.
in a small group. So it's only if you have to sit back and listen do you become bored.
Hmm.
But if you're actually engaged and there are rules and you have to kind of follow the rules, individual decision, group decision, individual decision, group decision. So you're going to be talking all the time.
Okay.
The level of conversation will vary by the culture. Some
Hmm.
cultures are more respectful, some are more aggressive, but nobody is bored in this process.
Okay. So with your games and your maps and maybe also the model, I saw many models in your drawings. I mean, in your PowerPoint. So it can make the process interesting, right? So you can create people playing, so-called playing and designing. Okay. I think we only have one more questions. And maybe I really want to ask you, sorry. Sorry, the audience, I just want to know, is there any limitation? Because you mentioned for international project, you only have 3 days, right? Like the Japan project, you only have 3 days.
Yes.
Is there any limitation or is there any difference between the 3 days workshops and then maybe the 2 months workshops in US? I mean, because you have some longer projects, right? Is there any difference between the short project and then the long projects?
Fundamental difference, because the work that I do in the United States is really, I work as an architect. So you're involved in many phases of the project. The work that I do internationally is more community organization, because it's the local people in that town that have to execute the work, continue the work. So it's basically a different role that I play internationally compared to the United States.
Okay. So which one is better, the short one or the whole process with participatory process?
For me, the short
Yes.
process.
Oh, okay.
Because I like, like the commandos. I have to come in quick, do the work, get everybody excited, so they can actually do the work themselves. That's much more exciting.
Okay.
Work in the United States kind of gets stretched out, and travel becomes a problem, and I get bored also. So I enjoy
Okay.
the short, intensive
Okay.
work.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think because of the time constraint is already almost limited. Maybe I will offer, is there any question or maybe is there any comment from Dr. Dwi or Miss Fanny or Miss Alvina before I close the, or thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and the question and answer. I think we need to applause again Prof. Sanoff. And so yeah, I would like to ask Miss Alvina some assistance. Do we need to, are we going to take photos for the whole?
Yes, please.
Okay. So before we end our first, or maybe first from Petra Christian University, I would like to thank all participants and also Prof. Sanoff and all participants that come and also ask questions to this wonderful guest lecture. Don't forget to ask to fill up the guest lecture attendance and feedback. We have some feedback forms for our organization. We also want to do some, sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry. Maybe we'll ask one short sharing from Petra University. This is Miss Sylvie. She's actually involved in service learning. Maybe only 5 minutes, Miss Sylvie, or maybe not more than 10. Miss Sylvie?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I will share
couldn't
a
see
little
you.
bit that
Okay.
I will share a little bit about our class. Actually, in
Okay.
this class, the lecturers are 3. One of them
Wait.
is me.
Maybe I need to put you inside the frame. Okay. Yes, please
Oh,
continue.
okay.
Okay, maybe I will introduce Miss Sylvie a little bit. She's a junior lecturer in our university, and she's involved with service learning in Wonosalam. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, please continue.
Okay. As I said before, that this class actually is a service learning class. In this class, we have 3 lecturers. The first one is Mrs. Ani Juniwati, and then Mr. Wirawan, and myself, Silviana. So in this project, actually, we are really interested with the profile. The project is located in the Jarak village, is one of the village in the Jombang city. So it's actually located in 482 meters above sea levels, and the climate is very cool because the temperature is about 25 to 28 degrees Celsius, and they have so many natural environment that it's really interesting and beautiful. And after we study about this place, we found that they have two uniqueness. The first one is about the religious harmony, their tolerance, and it's proved by some students from Miami-Dade College, Florida, United States. They came to this village to learn how they manage the tolerance between the various religions. And the second uniqueness that we found that is about the various religious festivals. So for example, this one, the left pictures is, we call it the tumpeng, the tumpeng mangoes. So it's like mangosteen, right? The mangosteen
Mangosteen.
because, yeah, mangosteen. So
Mangosteen.
yes, I'm a bit nervous. I'm so sorry. So it's about when they have a harvesting, and then the number of the harvesting is so much. So it's like it's like their celebration of the harvesting event. And then the second pictures on the right side, it's a melasti. So it's actually a festival of the Hindu followers. And then we think that those two uniqueness must be highlighted. So we decided to make a gallery of religious harmony. So in this place, it's a place that can be used for villagers and also a place to exhibit various religious activities in the Jarak village in order to enhance the strength point of their tolerance. So we decided to have the project in this area. So this area is in the it's on the this place called Bukit Pencaringan. So it's Pencaringan Hill in English. And talk about the process. So we are ongoing actually. So we have the field survey by the lecturer to discuss with the village government. And then in this case, we want to know their hopes and their needs. And then after that, we have a discussion with the students, what we are going to do and what kind of space that we want to provide. And then after that, the third steps is we had the field survey with the students so that the students can also feel the situation and then interview the locals. And because we are in the pandemic era, so not all the students, they're allowed by their parents to go to the site. So we had two types of interview. The first one is online, and then we have on-site as well. And then the fourth steps, it's a brainstorming. So in this case, both the lecturers and the students, we had already go to the sites and then interviewing the locals. Then after that, we have a brainstorming, and we let the students to give the ideas and then the options. And then after that, we have a discussion and finalization. So actually, now we are on the brainstorming, and we are ongoing to have the finalizations of the project design. Then the 6 and the 7, we haven't done yet, but we will present our ideas to the locals, like a public hearing. And then after that, after we hear their comments, and then we will do the revising and starting the constructions. And this is some of the documentations.
Thank you.
And here we have
Yes.
the ongoing process. It's still ongoing, so I haven't we haven't finalized it yet. Okay,
Thank you so much, Miss Sylvie. Yeah, just want to show a little bit, Prof. Sanoff, that we are actually also implementing participatory action research in service learning courses, not all courses yet, but in service learning courses. And this is only one example. I'm also doing service learning for people with disability, and also Miss Christine also doing service learning for children. So that's why we invite you, because we are really interested in this, and hopefully in the future we can do some collaboration, although with Zoom or other methods, or maybe we can buy your design games. I'm a big fan for actually, I want to admit in front of everybody, I'm a big fan of you, because I read your books and try to implement in my research in my PhD too. Okay, so thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Without any because of time limitation, and I know you have waited for us since two hours ago. So I just want to give the organizer to do some photo taking. Maybe Bu Elvina?
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Dear sir and madam, please open up your camera and look at the camera. There are 2 pages here. So the first page is, so the first page, look at the camera. Okay, smile, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, for the second page, okay, look at the camera. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elvina.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I will close this event. Thank you so much for Prof. Sanoff, and I will return this to Dr. Dwi. Do you want to have a closing or any last comments?
No, I think it's enough, Pak Gunawan. Thank you so much, Prof. Sanoff, for this lecture. Very interesting and very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you again, Prof. Sanoff, and we will dismiss this event. Thank you so much for all participants. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu, kita akan berpisah. Acaranya sudah selesai. Kami akhiri sampai di sini. Thank you so much, Prof. Sanoff.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
for
so much, Prof.
Thank you so
Sanoff.
much, Prof. Sanoff.
Thank you.